With Jujutsu Kaisen chapter 266, things really ramp up in a major way because the long-awaited battle of Yuji versus Sukuna, it is finally here. But as we've seen with Itadori, this is probably the most dangerous matchup with Sukuna because on top of Yuji's latent potential, seemingly getting closer and closer to coming out to the surface as the fight is dragging on, but it's also because with every hit that Yuji is landing, he is jarring loose Fushiguro. And based on how the chapter itself starts off, it looks like Sukuna might have at least been hit partially by the sure hit effect of Yuji's domain expansion. And what we're seeing at the start of this chapter is something that's adding a few more layers to the battle itself. So this is going to be a fight on two fronts. On the surface level, we get our typical meathead shonen battle, which is what we're all here for, because who doesn't like seeing some amazing uppercuts and combinations? But down beneath the surface, we have something bigger bubbling here. Yuji is finally getting to connect with Fushiguro, and this, my friends, is the moment that we as Sukuna fans, we got to let out a quick sigh, and then we got to hold our breaths again because this looks like it might be it.
Oh, no.
We open up the chapter with Yuji and Fushiguro, and they're in conversation, and we get a rather heartwarming moment where Fushiguro tells Yuji how important Sumiki is to him and how much his bond with her means to him because she was the one who helped take care of him. And what we're seeing here is that Gege is taking the time to reacclimate us as the audience with the parts of Fushiguro's character that we haven't seen in a while, because for the last several dozens of chapters, the guy, he's been in the depths of hell, basically traumatized by everything that has happened. He's literally been curled up in a fetal position. As readers, we're given a reason to care for his character. Even if someone like me doesn't really care for Fushiguro, you still see him in this moment drawn the way that he is, and you can't help but to feel a little bit of heartbreak for what he's had to endure because of everything that Sumiki meant for him. He basically tells Yuji that he loved her so much that he didn't want her living in this cruel world and that he didn't want any harm to come to her. He even goes as far as to say that he wishes she could have walked beside someone as bright and optimistic as Yuji, which that's a pretty huge moment because it is a glimpse at what we're seeing in terms of how he views Itadori. Him going as far as saying seeing a sight such as that would have been true happiness for him, that is huge because it serves as the important bridge that Yuji is needing in order to travel across in order to connect with Fushiguro's soul. This leads to Yuji showing what might be his greatest superpower, which is on a pretty common theme when it comes to the shonen protagonist, which is his ability to connect with people on an emotional level. Whereas in the last chapter, when he tried to do that with Sukuna and he failed miserably, at least so far as the story is showing us right now, he was able to find that common ground with Fushiguro, and it's in this moment that we're seeing that behind all the deaths that we've seen so far in the series, from Nanami to Gojo to Nobara, all of them, Gege is doing the one thing that all good writers do, which is to take the time to send a message to readers what it is that they view as being the human experience. And with this, it's a combination of sympathy and empathy, the two things that do truly make us human. Yuji understands what it is going on here because he shares the reason why his grandfather was so sick, and it's because he got lung cancer, and at one point they thought about ending his suffering. It's progressed to a point where Yuji wasn't able to do anything about it, which is something that hits differently when you're like a lot of people who have lost someone to cancer, because you know that feeling of helplessness and grief that eventually overwhelms you. Yuji knows deep down, deep inside, the depression and the anger and the sorrow that Fushiguro is feeling right now, which is why he knows the worst thing he can do in this moment is to tell him to live, because Yuji just gets it and he tells him, I'm not going to tell you to live. And I think that was a very bold message, and it goes in the face of what you would see with the typical shonen protagonist. All of our lives, we are told and we are conditioned to tell people to just be optimistic. When some great tragedy befalls people, our knee-jerk reaction is to say, hey, you're going to be okay, everything's going to work out, it's going to be okay, etc., etc. We rephrase it enough times until it works, when we know deep down in our hearts that this is not going to be the case, but we say it anyway because in the human experience, hope is the one thing that is both one of the most powerful tools as well as the most dangerous tool, because one can lead to inspiration and the other can lead to delusion. There are times where you know that you're deep down in the dumps, that hearing something like it's okay, it is the last thing you ever want to hear, or even what you need to hear in that moment. And Yuji, he understands understands, which is why he doesn't come right out and say it, I need you to live, but instead he says, I know I can't tell you to live, because the ball, it is truly in Fushigiro's court right now. It's then that Gege ramps things up by throwing us headfirst into the action, which has been taking place this entire time. Sukuna is using his hollow basket to counter Yuji's domain, and the long-awaited Yuji versus Sukuna battle is here at last, with the narrator weighing in to fill in the blanks for us with some much needed context. Now that Sukuna has 4 arms, he can use hand signs to keep hollow basket up, and he can then fight with his free hand. And this is the narrator telling us before Sukuna does and shows us that Sukuna is about to be on demon time, because for the longest stretch before this, he lost his limbs up until now. So the man, he's out for blood and he's vowing to make Yuji pay for everything, which leads to a rather intense bout of hand-to-hand combat. This whole sequence, it is amazing because of what it represents. We see Sukuna measuring his options against Yuji, coming to the conclusion that using Gojo's method to reset a burnout technique within a domain would come with way too many risk he might have to take. And while it's not a sign that Sukuna is desperate, it is a sign that he at least knows this battle is not going to be easy, not in the least at all. Their hand-to-hand combat clash, it is very quick, but it is super intense. But his thought process that is leading up to it, it just shows how he's carefully looking over his options, and it makes you see and appreciate how someone like Sukuna was able to maintain the title of the strongest for as long as he did, which is why it makes Yuji holding his own against Sukuna so impressive. Even in the face of Sukuna's mandatory villain dialogue of how every human is going to reap the consequences of Yuji pissing off Sukuna in the way that he did, it's just enough to get the mouth wet and watering with the battle that we've been waiting the entire series for. But Gege wisely decides to pull the scope back again, because he's taken the approach that this isn't TikTok, YouTube Shorts, this isn't Burger King, this isn't McDonald's, this is a filet mignon, and it's gonna take a little while to cook. We're gonna have to pay a little bit closer attention to the story a little while longer, because we're back in the conversation with Fushiguro and Yuji. This time it's Yuji and Kid Fushiguro in what appears to be the same spot where Gojo first met Fushiguro. And when the younger Fushiguro asks him what's wrong, we see Yuji with a twisted up expression and sadness and regret on his face, as he's saying that he's gonna be sad without Fushiguro. And it's that moment that you feel the pit in your stomach, because you begin to wondering, what is it that Gege's doing here? Where is he taking this? But just before you can digest the information, Gege wisely zooms in the scope again to place us right back into the fight. It's then that we see Sukuna's foot. It is now caught in the shadow, and this is where it gets interesting, because Sukuna knows right away Yuji somehow was able to connect with Fushiguro, and now the clock on Sukuna is officially ticking. He might have submerged Fushiguro in the bath, but Fushiguro is fighting back now, and this whole battle is taking on a new dynamic, and it's not one that is favorable to Sukuna. What felt like 900 years of Fushiguro being invisible, he's now got the will to live and the will to fight, and he's not going to make it easy on Sukuna. This leads to 2 battles that we spoke about earlier. They have now come to the same battlefield. It is Megumi doing what he can to help Yuji from the shadows, and it's because of this that Sukuna is trapped. Yuji is able to land a pretty clean shot on the guy, and this leads to Yuji smiling, that standard shonen protagonist grin, because he knows exactly what this means. He was able to reach Fushiguro, and he's fighting back, and it's because he knew exactly which buttons to push on Fushiguro and which buttons not to push at that time. Instead, he just let his emotions reach him, which in situations like that is something that speaks louder than words itself. This leads to Yuji and Sukuna clashing yet again, but this is where it leads to a twist. Just when it seems like Yuji is impressively getting the upper hand on Sukuna and about to break the hollow basket, Sukuna uses one of his slashes on Yuji's hand, but it doesn't hurt him, but instead it breaks the cursed tool that is equipped to Yuji's hand, which this is much needed info, because we were never told prior to this that it was a cursed tool. It was just a knee-jerk reaction to say, hey, Yuji might have ate the cursed wound paintings, but nope, this is a cursed tool that Yuji carried into the battle specifically for Sukuna. Now we can see why. However, This leads to Sukuna pressing forward by opening his domain to try and keep the pressure applied to Yuji, but unbeknownst to him, that latent talent that Arame spoke about a while back when Sukuna was telling the story about his twin, it is rising to the surface now, and Yuji is able to open his domain faster than Sukuna. What's impressive here is that Yuji adapted to Sukuna midway through the whole sequence, realizing that Sukuna had Gojo's technique to reset his burnout technique, and instead of pausing, Yuji adjusts, following his instincts to move deeper into the battle. We end the chapter off with one of Sukuna's fingers tied up in an open space. This is a tight shifter, and you have to at least feel a little bit of joy at the sight of Fushiguro finally finding his balls and his pride as a man. Sukuna might have his body, but Fushiguro now has his pride, and he's not going to go easy on Sukuna. There's a groundwork being laid here for Sukuna to lose Fushiguro, and the ending of Sukuna is well within our grasp right now because of the sight of the finger, just as these videos on the left and the right are right in the sight of you to check out more videos from Anime Explained.